Right now, as you read this sentence, your eyeball is under mechanical stress. Not metaphorically. Not as a figure of speech. The muscles behind your eyes are contracting, pulling the lens into a tight curve, forcing your focal point down to the distance of a screen or a page. A distance that, for almost all of human existence, eyes were never asked to hold. And if you are doing this young enough and often enough, the eyeball itself will begin to change shape. It will grow longer, it will physically deform, and once it does, it will never go back. You are probably wearing glasses, or contacts, or you're thinking about LASIK. Roughly 1 in 3 people reading this already has myopia, nearsightedness, and the number is accelerating at a rate that has no precedent in the 200,000-year history of the human eye. Researchers at the Brian Holden Vision Institute project that by 2050, 5 billion people, half the planet, will be myopic. 5 billion. This is not a story about screen time. It is not a parenting article. It is a story about what happens when a biological system that spent hundreds of thousands of years perfecting itself for one world gets dropped, with no warning, no adaptation time, no evolutionary preparation, into a completely different one. There is something that started the moment you learned to read, a process, a physical change. And by the time anyone told you it was happening, if they ever did, it had already begun, and it could not be undone. Stay with me on this. Because the story of human vision is not a story of decline, it's a story of mismatch. And once you understand what your eyes were actually built to do, you will never look at a page, or a screen, or a child sitting at a desk the same way again. Picture a human standing at the edge of the Rift Valley in East Africa, roughly 100,000 years ago. Dawn. The grass is pale and long. The air smells like dust and something animal. She is not moving. She is watching. Her eyes sweep the horizon, not the close horizon, not the middle ground, but the far edge where the grass meets the tree line, 200, maybe 300 meters out. Something moved there. Her visual system, without any conscious instruction, is already doing something extraordinary.
It is locking onto a shape, a silhouette processing contrast, edge, movement, velocity.
All in the space of a fraction of a second.
Her brain will decide whether that shape is a predator or prey in less time than it takes to form a thought. And her life depends on getting that decision right.
This is what human eyes were built for. Not the 6 inches between your face and a phone, not the 18 inches between your face and a page. The human visual system evolved for a world measured in meters and kilometers. Open landscape, moving targets, shifting light. The fova, the tiny high-resolution pit at the center of your retina, is packed with cone cells, optimized for detail at distance. The surrounding retina is loaded with rod cells, tuned to motion in peripheral vision, because in an open environment, the thing that will kill you almost never approaches from directly in front. It comes from the side, from the edge. For at least 90% of Homo sapiens' existence, your eyes barely changed. The eye that evolved in Africa was, by every clinical measure, excellent. Fossil evidence and studies of modern hunter-gatherer populations, groups like the Amazonian Simene, examined in a landmark 2021 study in The Lancet, show near-zero rates of myopia. Among the Simene, researchers found myopia prevalence of less than 2%, less than 2. In Singapore today, it is over 80. Here's the part that gets strange. The human eye is not fixed at birth. It develops, it calibrates, and the signal it uses to calibrate itself, the environmental input that tells the developing eye how long to grow, how curved to make the lens, what focal distance to optimize for, is light. Specifically bright outdoor light, the kind of light that exists at roughly 10,000 lux on an overcast day outside, and that the human eye bathed in for hundreds of thousands of years without interruption. The eye, in other words, was not designed and then deployed. It was designed to be completed by its environment. It expected a specific environment, a world of distance, motion, and light. It expected to spend childhood on the savannah. For 300,000 years, that expectation was met. Then, roughly 5,000 years ago, first in Mesopotamia, then Egypt, then China, something appeared that the human eye had never encountered in its entire evolutionary history. Symbols, written at close range, read at close range, held at close range for hours. The eye had no idea what to do with this. Here is what actually happens inside a developing eye when it is forced into sustained near focus. The eyeball is not a rigid structure. In childhood and adolescence, it is soft enough to change shape under mechanical pressure. When the eye focuses on something close, a book, a screen, a desk, the ciliary muscles inside the eye contract, the lens curves, and the image falls correctly on the retina. But when this happens for hours every day, year after year, during the critical developmental window between ages 6 and 14, the eye begins to respond in a way that no one fully predicted. It grows longer. The sclera, the white outer wall of the eyeball, stretches under the sustained mechanical load of repeated close focus. The axial length of the eye, the distance from front to back, increases by fractions of a millimeter. And because the retina is fixed at the back of the eye, a longer eyeball means the focal point of distant objects now falls in front of the retina instead of on it. Distant things blur. You can no longer see the lion at 300 meters. You cannot see the tree line. You can see with perfect clarity the page in your hand and almost nothing else. This is myopia, and it is, in the most literal sense possible, a physical deformation of an organ caused by an environmental mismatch. Ian Morgan at the Australian National University, along with colleagues whose work was published in The Lancet in 2012, identified the scale of what was happening in East Asia, where educational intensity and indoor confinement reached their most extreme modern form first. In Singapore, South Korea, and urban China, myopia rates among young adults had surpassed 80%. In some demographic groups in Seoul, the figure approached 97%. This was not a genetic shift. The genetics of these populations had not changed. What had changed was the environment. But it gets darker. The mechanism is not simply near work. Catherine Rose at the University of Sydney identified something more specific and more unsettling. The eye does not deform because you read. It deforms because you read indoors. Because the eye's axial growth is regulated by dopamine release in the retina, and retinal dopamine release is triggered by bright light. High-lux outdoor spectrum light, the kind that exists at 10,000 lux under an overcast sky, and that drops to roughly 500 lux inside a well-lit classroom. That is a 20-fold difference, and it is enough to switch the eye's growth regulation off entirely. Children who spend 2 to 3 hours per day outdoors, regardless of whether they are reading, playing, or simply sitting, show significantly reduced rates of myopia onset compared to children who spend the same time indoors. The outdoor light itself is protective. The eye, in bright light, releases enough retinal dopamine to signal. Growth, stop here. Without that signal, it keeps growing, it stretches, and the damage is permanent. Glasses correct the blur. They do not fix the eye. The axial elongation that caused the myopia does not reverse. The eye you have at 25 is the eye you will have for life. The deformation is structural. It is done. Let me give you a specific child. She is 7 years old, she lives in Singapore, she wakes at 6:30, breakfast, rushed, school starts at 7:30. She will sit at a desk, focusing on materials at arm's length for approximately 6 hours. Then supplementary classes, math enrichment, language tuition for 2 more hours. Then homework. Then, if she is lucky, dinner with her family before screens for 30 minutes as a reward. Then bed. Total time outdoors today, 22 minutes, walking between buildings. Total time spent in near focus, approximately 10 hours. She does not have myopia yet. She will, almost certainly by the time she is 12. Her parents will take her to the optometrist, receive a prescription, buy her glasses, and be told this is normal. And it is normal. It is the most normal thing in Singapore right now, which is precisely the problem. Here's what most people miss. The conversation about myopia almost always frames this as a screen time problem, a parenting problem, a discipline problem, too much phone, not enough willpower, not enough rules. But the science does not support that frame. The problem is not what children are looking at. It is where they are looking at it. It is the light. The ancient calibration signal that the developing eye has been waiting for hundreds of thousands of years, that modern childhood has simply removed. Then, you are 6 years old. You spend your days outside. Dawn light hits your retinas at 10,000 lux. Your ciliary muscles are relaxed most of the day, scanning distance, tracking movement. Your retina is flooded with dopamine. Your eyeball receives the signal. Stop here. Growth regulated. Focal point calibrated. Vision sharp. Now, you are 6 years old. You are inside by 7:30. The lights above you produce 500 lux. Your ciliary muscles contract and hold for 10 hours. Your retina receives no dopamine signal. Your eyeball keeps growing, fractional millimeter by fractional millimeter, season by season, grade by grade. And now watch what this means. This is not a story about individual children making bad choices. This is a story about the most successful educational systems in human history. The systems that produce the highest literacy rates, the highest test scores, the most technically skilled workforces on Earth, systematically and predictably destroying the eyesight of the children inside them. Not as a side effect anyone noticed and ignored, as an outcome that was simply never measured until the damage was already population scale. By the time Ian Morgan's team published their findings in The Lancet, the myopia epidemic in East Asia was already 2 generations deep. The grandchildren of people with near-perfect vision were growing up in a world where wearing glasses before age 10 had become normal enough to stop being noticed. The science is remarkably clear. The countries with the highest literacy rates also have the highest rates of myopia. The correlation is almost perfectly linear. Researchers no longer describe it as a metaphor. They call it what it is, a myopia epidemic. That process I mentioned at the beginning, the irreversible physical change that began when you first learned to read, has a name. And once you know it, you start seeing it everywhere. In classrooms full of children wearing glasses, in optometrist waiting rooms crowded with 8-year-olds, in your own prescription, growing slightly stronger year after year. You were that child, sitting at a desk inside under fluorescent lights, while your eyes quietly, invisibly, permanently changed. And no one told you it was happening, because no one knew to look. There is a temptation here to jump straight to solutions. Spend more time outside, 2 or 3 hours a day, bright light. The evidence is strong. But this video isn't really about solutions. It's about the cost of a trade we made without realizing it. Reading is not the enemy. Literacy built civilization. Medicine, science, law, history, everything we know exists because humans learned to decode symbols on a page. Faced with the choice between illiteracy and glasses, no society would choose illiteracy. But we never stopped to ask what we were giving up. We assumed the eye was fixed. It wasn't. It adapted by deforming. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors scanned distant horizons, reading landscapes as fluently as you read these words now. The eye inside your skull today is fundamentally the same eye that once stood at the edge of the Rift Valley at dawn. It just never got the chance to become what it was supposed to be. You live in the most literate civilization in human history, and you may be the first generation of humans whose eyes never learned to see it.